Hey there. Before you get cozy in your warm home, under your fluffy blanket with central heating humming in the background, let's take a little trip back in time. Picture it. A freezing night in medieval Europe, and you're not a knight or a noble. No feasts, no castles, no roaring fireplaces. You're a peasant. And tonight, the main goal is simple. Don't freeze to death. Forget fairy tales. For most people, medieval life wasn't about shining armor or dancing at banquets. It was about survival, especially in winter. Each year, winter came barreling in like an angry beast with frostbitten claws, and peasants faced it armed with little more than grit, wool, and a whole lot of stubbornness. Now imagine this. You live in a one-room hut, walls made of sticks and mud, maybe some dung if you were feeling fancy. There's no insulation, no glass windows, just a small hole plugged with animal skin and optimism. Your floor? Dirt? Your roof? That straw that leaks when it rains and sags under snow. It's less a house and more like nature's drafty attempt at a home. Inside, it's barely warmer than outside. And barely is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. If it's 25 degrees out, congrats. Your hut might be a toasty 30. Every gust of wind finds a new crack to sneak through, just to remind you who's boss. Nighttime is the worst. The fire sputters out by midnight, leaving more smoke than heat. One side of your body roasts while the other freezes. Move closer? Sure, but so does everyone else. And there's only one fire, one room, and way too many people. Speaking of people, sleeping wasn't a solo event. The entire family, parents, kids, grandparents, plus the occasional goat, piled together for warmth like human lasagna. You didn't care about privacy. You cared about not turning into a popsicle. If you were lucky, you got the middle spot. If you weren't, you got the drafty edge and a cold pig's backside for a pillow. Clothes? Think layers of rough, scratchy wool. No trendy coats or waterproof boots. Just whatever rags you had, stacked like you were playing medieval dress up with no regard for fashion or hygiene. And yes, they stank. But guess what? That grease and grime actually helped trap heat. It wasn't gross. It was survival. Kind of. And your bed? It was probably a sack filled with straw. It poked, it flattened, it hosted fleas like it was a luxury hotel. But it beat sleeping directly on the dirt, which, by the way, turned into a slushy mud pit every time it snowed or rained. So yes, you technically had an indoor water feature. Still, people made it work. They jammed moss in the wall cracks, layered rushes on the floor, and rubbed sheep fat on the walls. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and if you had to insulate your house with animal poop, you did it, because comfort wasn't the goal. Survival was. So next time you crank up the heat or complain that your socks aren't thick enough, take a moment to appreciate that you're not waking up with frost on your eyebrows while sharing a straw mattress with your cousin, 2 chickens, and a judgmental goat. Because for medieval peasants, every morning you woke up alive wasn't just a new day, it was a miracle. Imagine waking up at 3 a.m. because the wind slapped you in the face. Not outside, inside your home. Welcome to the medieval peasant experience, where your house was less a shelter and more a very determined wind tunnel wearing a straw wig. Let's talk about peasant homes. Historians lovingly call them wattle and daub structures. Translation: twigs woven together like giant baskets, then smeared with a charming paste made from mud, straw, and, you guessed it, animal dung. Not because peasants were gross. Dung was free, sticky, and always within arm's reach. It was the medieval version of Home Depot insulation foam. But no matter how artistically you smeared cow poop on your walls, it didn't keep the cold out. Every wall had gaps. Every corner had a breeze. Cold wind danced into your one-room shack like it paid rent, slipping through every crack, whistling past your ears and reminding you that warmth was a luxury, not a right. The floors? Not wooden, not even stone, just packed dirt. And when it rained or snowed, that dirt became a soft, squishy swamp. Some peasants threw straw down to soak it up. Others didn't bother. Either way, your floor felt like walking through a chilled compost pile. Bonus, the mud liked to sneak up from below, giving you a fun little foot surprise every morning. Nature's alarm clock. And the roof? Oh, the roof. That straw sounds cozy, right? Picture it after 3 months of snow, rain, and the occasional curious squirrel, sagging, dripping, and every now and then just casually collapsing. If you've ever had dinner interrupted by a chunk of frozen roof landing in your stew, you're either a medieval peasant or having a very weird camping trip. Windows, if they existed, were barely fist-sized holes. They were covered with stretched animal skins or wooden shutters, because glass was so expensive that even lords treated it like treasure. For peasants, a good window was one the wind didn't rip clean off during a storm. And even if it held, you still had the honor of gazing through a translucent scrap of cowhide. Not exactly a room with a view. Doors? Think wooden planks held together by stubbornness and hope. Hinges made of rope. Latches carved from bone. You didn't lock them so much as lean something heavy against them and pray no wolves showed up with ambition. Now, let's get to the ambiance. Your medieval home had one scent. A blend of damp earth, smoky fire, damp straw, and the unmistakable aroma of barnyard. Add in some mildew, goat hair, and human sweat, and congratulations, you've bottled the signature scent of medieval survival. Ode to misery. But here's the kicker. Peasants didn't just give up, they got scrappy. They stuffed moss and straw into wall gaps. They layered old rags over holes. They rubbed extra mud on the outside of their homes as a winter ritual. Yes, medieval peasant life included seasonal dung smearing. It was kind of like painting your house, if paint smelled like a livestock pen. Some even doubled the daub on the coldest walls. Others stole turf from nearby fields to patch up roof leaks. And the truly desperate hung spare cloaks over the doorways, hoping it would trap heat and keep out the howling wind. Spoiler, it didn't really work. But it made them feel like they were fighting back, and sometimes that was enough. Inside, the cold came at you from all directions. Above, through the sagging roof. Below, from the frozen earth. Around you, through walls that looked solid but acted like sieves. It was a full 360-degree assault on your body heat. And in the dead of night, with the fire low and your breath visible in the air, you realized something awful. Your home, your supposed safe space, was just another battlefield in the war against winter. Still, peasants endured. Not because it was easy, not because they were comfortable, but because there was no choice. They didn't survive winter because their homes were warm. They survived in spite of the cold, because of sheer determination, creativity, and a refusal to freeze quietly. So the next time you complain about a drafty window or a weak heater, remember the people who lived in houses made of sticks, mud, and cow pies. And somehow they made it work. In the middle of your freezing mud-floored hut, surrounded by walls that may or may not survive the next storm, there's one thing that stands between you and becoming a human popsicle. The fire. Not a fireplace. Not a cozy brick hearth with a mantle where you hang stockings. Number this was a pit. Maybe a few stones in a circle. Maybe not even that. Just a small open flame that produced more smoke than heat and looked like it might give up at any moment. But for the medieval peasant, it was everything. The hearth wasn't just for cooking. It was your heating system, your light source, your bug repellent, and your entertainment center. It was the one thing that made life barely survivable in winter. Let the fire die. You might as well dig your own grave. But starting a fire in winter wasn't easy. Matches, lighters, dream on. You needed flint, steel, bone-dry kindling, and the patience of a saint. So what did peasants do? They invented a clever hack, fire banking. Fire banking meant covering the glowing embers with a thick layer of ash before bed, like tucking your fire in for the night under a warm blanket of soot. If you did it right, the embers stayed alive until morning. If you did it wrong, well, welcome to hypothermia at sunrise. Families developed their own techniques. Some used only dry ash. Others swore a little dampness was key. Some packed the coals tight, others let them breathe. These methods were passed down like sacred family recipes, except instead of cookies, the prize was not freezing to death. Still, it wasn't foolproof. A stray draft, a wrong move, or a curious sheep could snuff the whole thing out. That's why someone always had to wake up in the middle of the night and check the coals. No one wanted that job. Imagine dragging yourself out of semi-warm straw bedding at 2 a.m. with frozen fingers, tripping over a pig, and trying to coax a spark from damp wood. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. And the smoke? Oh, there was so much smoke. Most peasant homes didn't have chimneys. The smoke just drifted upward, out through holes in the thatch, or not. Often, it filled the entire room. Breathing felt like slow cooking your lungs, but hey, at least the fleas didn't like it. Bonus fumigation, everyone sat near the fire. Not around it. There wasn't room. You angled your body toward it like a plant reaching for sunlight. If you were lucky, you got the warm side. If not, you rotated every so often to avoid becoming a medieval ice sculpture, The fire didn't heat the whole room, it barely heated itself. But it gave you something, a little orange glow, a sense of life. People would gather around and tell stories, murmur prayers, or just stare into the flames, exhausted from the day and hoping that glow would hold out till dawn. Even animals got in on the action. Chickens wandered close to the hearth, pigs snorted contentedly nearby, and the family dog wedged itself between people and fire like a furry farting heat sponge. Everyone fought for position. It was medieval thermostat management, except with more elbows and fewer rules. Fire was the heartbeat of the house. You didn't let it die. You planned meals around it, timed chores to it, even socialized by it. And when you finally laid down to sleep, the fire banking done, the coals tucked in, and the smoke slowly thinning, you whispered a hope. Not a prayer for wealth or comfort, but for just one more warm ember to greet you in the morning. Because in a world where the cold wanted to kill you, and your house was about as secure as a wet paper bag, that stubborn little flame was your best defense. You think you know what it's like to sleep in a crowded room? Think again. Because medieval peasants took the idea of cozy and cranked it to levels that would make even the most budget-conscious hostel blush. When the fire was down to its last glowing ember and frost was creeping in through the walls, peasants turned to the most ancient, reliable, slightly smelly source of heat there was: each other. Forget about personal space. That was a luxury no one could afford. The cold didn't care about your bubble, so entire families, parents, kids, grandparents, and sometimes a neighbor or two, would huddle together in one giant heap of limbs, cloaks, and muffled snoring. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't peaceful, but it was warm. And in medieval winter, that was the only metric that mattered. Picture it. A one-room hut. Pitch dark, except for the dying fire. You're lying shoulder to shoulder on a mattress made of flattened straw and questionable life forms. There's your cousin breathing in your ear, your kid kicking you in the ribs, and someone's barefoot, God help you, pressing against your face. If you were lucky, it was human. Strategic placement was key. The frailest, babies, toddlers, elders, got the middle spot shielded by everyone else's body heat. They were the prized eggs in this weird human omelet. The strong and sturdy adults, you slept on the outer ring, like a buffer zone between the cold and the core. Think of it as medieval insulation, alive, exhausted, and farting. And yes, there were animals. Cows, goats, chickens, pigs. If it had a heartbeat and gave off body heat, it made the cut. Chickens roosted in rafters. Goats curled up by the wall. Pigs sprawled out like they owned the place. Sharing your sleeping space with livestock wasn't gross, it was smart. Those animals gave off warmth. And if they pooped on the floor while doing it, so be it. Nobody complained. You just kicked some straw over it and went back to sleep. Priorities. But this human and animal pileup wasn't just for heat. It was a kind of survival culture. With nowhere to go and no firewood to waste, families talked. They sang. They gossiped. They whispered stories in the dark and muttered prayers under scratchy blankets. It wasn't exactly quality time, but it was bonding in its rawest form. And if you think it was peaceful, think again. Somebody always snored like a dying bear. Someone else twitched all night. And of course, there was always the goat, chewing on your blanket, staring at you with judgmental eyes. Still, for all the discomfort, this method worked. Body heat trapped between layers of cloth and flesh could keep you alive on nights where the temperature dropped so low, your breath crystallized midair. And if someone moved too much and let the cold sneak in, you heard about it all night. Nothing says family love like passive-aggressively scolding someone for kicking off the warmth. The bedding itself didn't help much. A shared straw mattress got flatter and smellier with every passing week. You'd throw some fresh rushes on top now and then, but mostly it was a crunchy, lumpy mess. Fleas were standard. So were lice. But again, no one cared. You weren't aiming for comfort. You were aiming for not frozen. And when it came to sleeping arrangements, fairness wasn't a thing. You didn't get to pick your spot. It was based on heat logistics. Grandma might smell like boiled cabbage, but if she was warmer than your cousin Tom, she got the center. By sunrise, you woke stiff, damp, and covered in straw. Your muscles ached from sleeping in weird angles. You coughed from inhaling smoke all night, but you were still breathing. And in the medieval winter playbook, that counted as a massive win. So the next time you complain that your roommate stole your blanket or your dog hogged the bed, remember this. At least you're not sandwiched between your uncle and a snorting pig, trying to sleep through a windstorm while sharing body heat like a survival burrito. Because in the Middle Ages, comfort was optional. But huddling for warmth? That was non-negotiable. You've probably heard the phrase, home is where the heart is. For medieval peasants, home was also where the cow slept, and the pig, and the chickens, and the goat that refused to stay quiet after sundown. In the dead of winter, when temperatures dropped lower than your hopes, and your walls might as well have been made of lace, you needed every ounce of warmth you could find. And that meant moving your animals inside. Not into a barn, because you didn't have one. Into your house. Yes, really. Imagine ending a long day of scraping frozen turnips out of the ground, trudging through snowdrifts in wooden shoes, only to come home, yank open your flimsy wooden door, and be greeted not by peace or silence, but by a snorting, farting, steaming livestock convention happening right on your dirt floor, and no one complained. Because animals weren't just property, they were heat sources, living, breathing radiators. A single cow could generate enough warmth to slightly raise the temperature of a one-room hut. Not by much, but when your toes are turning blue, a few extra degrees can mean the difference between a miserable night and a frostbitten disaster. Cows were the VIPs of the sleeping arrangement. They usually got a prime spot along the wall where their bulk could radiate outwards like a giant bovine furnace. Goats, being smaller and sneakier, squeezed in wherever they pleased. Chickens nested in baskets, rafters, or under benches. Pigs? They didn't care. They plopped down in the middle of the floor like they owned the place, and honestly, they kinda did. This wasn't just cute or quirky, it was survival. Livestock inside meant fewer frozen animals in the morning, and fewer thieves willing to sneak in and grab them. Because yes, even in the middle of a blizzard, someone might try to steal your pig. But they were a lot less likely to succeed if it was sleeping next to your snoring grandfather. Of course, sharing your sleeping quarters with a bunch of animals came with consequences. Noise? Constant. Chickens clucking, pigs snorting, goats bleating at shadows. Privacy? A fantasy. Smell? Legendary. Imagine the combined aroma of manure, damp straw, unwashed humans, and burning firewood. Then amplify it. Medieval peasants didn't light candles for ambiance. They lit them to try and beat back the overwhelming scent of goat butt and cow breath. And hygiene? Well, let's just say the floor doubled as a toilet more often than anyone liked. People got used to stepping carefully in the dark, or they didn't, and learned the hard way. But still, no one kicked the animals out. Why would they? In a world where wind blew straight through your walls, and your only blanket was a thin woolen rag, a pig's belly was a legitimate source of comfort. Sure, you might wake up with a chicken on your head. But hey, your ears weren't frozen off, so call it a win. Over time, peasants developed an impressive tolerance for their four-legged roommates. They didn't just accept them, they relied on them. Some even arranged the animals strategically, placing the warmest ones closest to the most vulnerable family members. Newborn baby, put a goat on that. Grandma's feet getting cold, slide a pig over there. In the medieval mind, this wasn't weird. It was just life. When the snow piled high and the fire burned low, you clung to anything warm, even if it oinked. So the next time your dog jumps on your bed and you're tempted to push them off, pause for a second. Remember the people who went to sleep every night sandwiched between a snoring uncle and a snorting hog? They didn't have options. You do. But let's be honest, on the coldest nights, cuddling with a warm creature, even one that occasionally drools, doesn't sound so bad. Let's talk fashion. No, not runway fashion, not Instagram-ready streetwear. We're talking real gritty, mud-stained, medieval peasant winter fashion. The kind of clothing that didn't just make a statement, it kept you alive. In the 1300s, nobody cared what color was in season. The only thing that mattered was how many layers you could throw on before the cold stopped trying to kill you. Forget style. Survival was the trend, and everyone was following it. Here was the winter wardrobe, a scratchy linen under tunic covered by a slightly thicker wool tunic, maybe a second one if you were lucky, leggings that sagged more than they hugged, a cloak that had seen better decades, and, if you were living large, a ragged sheepskin tossed over your shoulders like a prize. And that was just your day wear. At night, you didn't take anything off, you piled more on. Clothes didn't come off, they evolved. Each new layer was another shield against the icy air creeping into your bones. Boots? Please, most peasants didn't own anything resembling modern footwear. At best, you had wooden clogs. More often, it was cloth wrapped around your feet like sad little burritos, stuffed inside scraps of leather or whatever passed for a shoe that season. You weren't walking, you were shuffling. Every step was a crunchy, freezing gamble. Now, let's talk about cleanliness, or the complete lack of it. Laundry in the winter was a fool's errand. To wash your clothes, you had to carry them to a half-frozen stream, smash through the ice, soak them in near-Arctic water, and then wait 3 days for them to dry. If they didn't just freeze into stiff wool sculptures. So instead of washing, you layered. Instead of cleaning, you hoped. Eventually, your clothes became walking history exhibits. Each stain, each crusted patch, a memory of survival. And believe it or not, all that dirt, it helped. Yep, the grease, grime, and general filth that built up on your clothes acted like medieval Gore-Tex. Layers of dried mud and natural body oils clogged the gaps in your threadbare tunics, making them slightly more wind-resistant. You may have smelled like a compost heap, but you were warmer than your freshly bathed neighbor. And guess who lived longer? Hats were critical. Scarves, gold, gloves, a miracle. Most people wrapped scraps of wool or linen around their heads and hands, tying them off like sad little dumplings. And you didn't take them off. Ever. Kids were wrapped up so tightly in cloth layers they looked like overstuffed turnips, waddling around with just their eyes poking out. Everyone wore everything they owned, all at once, at all times. The layering wasn't fashion forward, it was forward march or freeze. You became a walking pile of wool rags and mystery smells. You looked like a scarecrow that wandered into town and decided to stay. And forget about changing your base layer. Most peasants kept the same shirt on for weeks, maybe months. You didn't swap it out. You just added more on top. By the time spring came, peeling it off was less laundry and more archaeology. Was it itchy? Absolutely. Uncomfortable? Without question. But it was your only defense against the brutal cold. And in the winter, warmth beat style. Every time. So next time you complain that your coat is too bulky or your scarf doesn't match your jacket, just remember this. Medieval peasants walked around looking like lumpy woolen onions. And they were grateful for it. Because if you had one more layer than your neighbor, that might be the reason you woke up with all your toes still attached. In a world without heaters, hot water, or anything remotely resembling modern comfort, dirt wasn't shameful. It was strategic. It was insulation. It was, in a strange way, beautiful. At least until spring, when it finally thawed, and it peeled off like medieval armor. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, not from a bad dream, but because your hip just went numb from pressing into frozen dirt. Welcome to the medieval peasant experience, where the floor wasn't just cold, it was out for blood. Let's get something straight. Medieval homes didn't have floors like we know them today. No hardwood, no tiles, not even creaky old planks. The floor was the ground itself. That's it. Dirt. Compacted by years of footsteps and whatever livestock happened to walk across it. And in winter, that dirt turned into a freezing slab that sucked warmth out of your body like a hungry ghost. Some peasants tried to make it better. They tossed straw across the floor, nature's original area rug. Others used rushes, those long reed-like plants, to create a softer layer. But here's the catch. They didn't clean the old ones out. They just threw fresh rushes on top of the old decaying mess. Over time, this created a living, breathing mat of compost, fleas, and unidentifiable crunch. It was basically a biodiverse carpet with teeth. And don't get too excited about beds either. The average peasant didn't have one. If you were lucky, you might have a wooden frame stuffed with straw or hay. If not, you just threw down a pile of rushes and hoped gravity didn't freeze your bones to the earth overnight. The ground wasn't passive. It actively fought back. Cold seeped up like fingers creeping into your soul. Drop anything on it? Gone. Part of the permafrost now. A spoon, a shoe, your dignity. It all disappeared into the icy abyss. You could try to insulate with more straw, maybe even old cloth, but it flattened quickly, grew mold faster, and made every movement sound like you were sleeping on a bed of potato chips. Sleeping wasn't restful. It was tactical. You shifted positions constantly. One side freezing, one side sweating. Rotating like a human rotisserie chicken to avoid frostbite. Every toss and turn was more about blood flow than comfort. And then there were the bugs, fleas, lice, mites, you name it. Your straw bedding wasn't just prickly and uneven, it was alive. If you woke up scratching more than sleeping, congratulations. You were experiencing authentic medieval comfort. People didn't sleep in silence either. They coughed. They muttered. They sneezed. They groaned. Add in the ambient barnyard, noises of chickens clucking in their sleep, and goats occasionally stomping near your head, and you've got the medieval version of a white noise machine, just smellier and slightly more dangerous. And let's not forget what happened when it rained or snowed heavily. Since your home didn't have a solid foundation, moisture seeped up from the ground. In extreme weather, you weren't just cold, you were soggy. Your house had indoor water features, but not the relaxing kind. Think of it as sleeping inside a poorly built root cellar, with a leaky roof and a floor that squelched. But peasants adapted. They layered straw thicker. They dried out their bedding in the rare moments of sun. They even rubbed sheep fat into their walls and floors to help repel moisture. It wasn't glamorous, it was greasy, but it helped. You see, in medieval life, you didn't control the cold. You negotiated with it. You didn't conquer the floor. You learned to live on top of it, just long enough to get some rest before the next freezing day began. Every night was a gamble. Would the floor win tonight? Would the cold reach your core? Would the straw hold? Or would it collapse into a compost pit of sadness? If you woke up still warmish, still moving, with most of your fingers working, that was a win. So next time you lie down on your memory foam mattress and complain that it's a bit too soft, spare a thought for the medieval peasant trying not to freeze solid on a floor made of mud, straw, and pure willpower. Because in those days, a good night's sleep didn't mean sweet dreams, it meant waking up at all. Think your house is drafty because you feel a chill near the window? Try living in a structure made of twigs, mud, and hope. For medieval peasants, the cold wasn't just something outside. It was inside. It was in the walls. It came up through the floor and down from the ceiling. It snuck in through every gap, every crack, every hole the builder forgot or gave up on. It was an enemy that never slept, and the battle against it never ended. These homes weren't built for winter. They were built quickly, cheaply, and with whatever materials were lying around. Sticks, straw, mud, and yes, a generous helping of animal dung. The result? A charmingly lopsided one-room hut that looked like it might blow away in a strong sneeze. But peasants weren't helpless. They were scrappy, and when the wind came howling, they fought back with whatever they had on hand. And we do mean whatever. First came the cracks. Walls dried out and pulled apart. Mud crumbled. Gaps formed between beams. So people stuffed them with moss, hay, scraps of old clothing, and animal hair. Anything vaguely soft or squishable went into the gaps. If you had a hole in your wall the size of your fist, that was a job for the family's worn-out leggings and some goat fur. Problem solved, kind of. Then came the annual ritual of wall smearing. Every autumn, families would go outside and apply a fresh coat of daub to the walls. That's a medieval mixture of mud, straw, and, you guessed it, manure. Cold hands slapping frozen dung on your house? That's not HGTV. That's reality. But it helped seal up holes and added a bit more thickness to your very thin defenses. If you were lucky, it even stayed up through the first snowstorm. The roof? That was its own kind of disaster. Made from bundles of straw or reeds, thatched roofs were like giant sponges. After months of rain and snow, they sagged, leaked, and sometimes collapsed under the weight. Peasants patched them with more straw, old cloaks, bits of turf, and when desperation hit, mud pies slapped on from the outside.